The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Windsor Castle as Queen Camilla walked briskly toward the main entrance. Her heels clicked against the ancient stones, echoing through the quiet morning air. She carried herself with the dignity expected of her position, but those who knew her well could see the tension in her shoulders. Today was different from other days, and she could feel it in her bones. Behind her, 2 royal guards flanked a young man who kept his head down, his hands nervously adjusting the strap of a worn leather trunk he carried. This was Tom, Camilla's son from her previous marriage, a detail that many people conveniently forgot when discussing the royal family. At 28 years old, Tom had always lived in the shadow of his famous stepfamily, trying to carve out his own path while carrying the weight of his mother's new status. The trunk he carried was old and weathered, passed down from his grandfather. It contained personal items that meant the world to him, letters from his late father, photographs from his childhood, and documents related to his small business venture. Tom had been staying at the castle for a family gathering, something that happened rarely but was always filled with tension and unspoken expectations. As they approached the security checkpoint, one of the guards stepped forward. His name was Officer Matthews, a man who had served the royal family for over 15 years. He was known for following protocol to the letter, never bending rules for anyone regardless of their status. His colleague, Officer Bennett, stood nearby, watching the interaction with growing unease. "Sir, we need to inspect your luggage before you leave the premises," Matthews announced in a crisp, professional tone. This was standard procedure for anyone leaving the castle, even family members. Security had been tightened in recent months due to various threats, and no exceptions were made. Tom looked up at his mother, hoping she might intervene, but Camilla simply nodded. She understood the importance of security protocols, even when they applied to her own family. "It's just routine, Tom," she said softly, though her voice carried a hint of apology. The trunk was placed on a metal table that had been set up for inspections. Tom's hands trembled slightly as he fumbled with the old brass clasps. The trunk had belonged to his grandfather, a man who had served in World War II and had passed down many stories along with this precious possession. The leather was cracked with age and the metal corners were tarnished, but it held together through decades of use. Officer Matthews watched impatiently as Tom struggled with the stubborn clasps. The morning was already running behind schedule, and there were other security matters that needed attention. After a few moments of watching Tom's careful attempts to open the trunk without damaging it, Matthews stepped forward with obvious irritation. "Let me handle this," he said brusquely, pushing Tom aside. Without waiting for permission or considering the delicate nature of the antique trunk, Matthews grabbed the leather handle with both hands and pulled forcefully. The sound that followed was heartbreaking, a loud ripping noise as the aged leather tore completely apart. The contents of the trunk spilled across the courtyard like scattered memories. Photographs flew in the morning breeze, some landing in puddles from the previous night's rain. Letters in his father's handwriting scattered across the wet stones. A small wooden box containing his grandfather's war medals cracked open, sending the precious decorations rolling across the cobblestones. Tom stood frozen in shock, watching as pieces of his family history were destroyed before his eyes. His face went pale and his hands reached out helplessly toward the scattered items. Some of the photographs were already soaking up water from the puddles, the images beginning to blur and fade. Years of precious memories were being ruined in a matter of seconds. Camilla gasped audibly, her royal composure cracking as she watched her son's devastation. She had given him that trunk on his 18th birthday, along with all the family treasures it contained. She knew how much these items meant to him, especially the letters from his father, who had died when Tom was just 16 years old. Officer Bennett immediately began gathering the scattered items, his face showing genuine concern and regret. He carefully picked up the medals and tried to save what photographs he could, but the damage was already extensive. The other staff members who had witnessed the incident stood in uncomfortable silence, unsure of how to react to such a breach of respect toward a family member. Matthews, realizing the gravity of what had just happened, began to stammer an apology, but the words felt hollow in the face of such careless destruction. He had acted without thinking, letting his impatience override his judgment, and now he faced the consequences of his thoughtless actions. The morning air was filled with tension, as everyone waited to see how this situation would be resolved. Tom knelt on the whetstones, trying to salvage what he could of his destroyed possessions, his hands shaking with a mixture of grief and anger. This was more than just damaged property. It was the destruction of irreplaceable family history and precious memories that could never be restored. The silence that followed the destruction was deafening. Tom remained on his knees, carefully collecting the water-damaged photographs and trying to salvage what remained of his grandfather's letters. His hands moved with desperate precision, as if speed could somehow undo the damage that had been done. Each wet photograph he picked up felt like holding a piece of his broken heart. Camilla watched her son with growing anguish, her royal training warring with her maternal instincts. She wanted to comfort him, to somehow make this right. But she also understood the delicate position she held within the royal family. Any reaction she made would be scrutinized and potentially used against her in the complex politics of palace life. Officer Matthews stood awkwardly beside the destroyed trunk, his face growing redder by the minute as he realized the full extent of his mistake. He had served the royal family faithfully for 15 years, never once having a serious incident on his record. Now, in a moment of impatience and poor judgment, he had potentially destroyed his career and caused irreparable harm to a family member. "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize," Matthews stammered, addressing Camilla. "The trunk seemed stuck and I didn't realize it was so fragile. I was just trying to expedite the process." His words sounded weak even to his own ears, and he knew that no amount of apologizing could undo what had been done. Officer Bennett continued to help Tom gather the scattered items, his movements careful and respectful. He had always prided himself on treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their status, and he was horrified by his colleagues' thoughtless actions. "Some of these photos might be salvageable if we get them dried properly," he said quietly to Tom, trying to offer some hope in the midst of the disaster. Tom looked up at Bennett with grateful eyes, though tears were beginning to form. "These are the only pictures I have of my father and me together," he said in a voice barely above a whisper. "He died when I was 16 and my mother gave me this trunk with all his letters and photos. It's all I have left of him." The weight of Tom's words hit everyone present like a physical blow. This wasn't just about damaged property or even family heirlooms. This was about the irreplaceable connection between a son and his deceased father. The letters that were now soaked and possibly ruined contained the last words his father had written to him, advice and love that could never be recreated. Camilla's composure finally cracked completely. She knelt down beside her son, her expensive dress touching the whetstones without any regard for the damage. "Tom, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We'll find a way to restore everything that can be saved. I promise you that." A small crowd had begun to gather as word of the incident spread through the castle staff. Maids, gardeners, and other workers watched from a respectful distance, their faces showing sympathy for Tom and disapproval for Matthew's careless actions. The story would spread quickly through the servant quarters, and by evening, everyone in the castle would know what had happened. Among the scattered papers, Tom found a letter that was still partially readable. It was one of the last letters his father had written to him before his death, full of encouragement and pride in his son's achievements. The ink had run in several places, making some words impossible to read, but the love behind the writing was still clear. Tom held the letter against his chest as if trying to absorb whatever remained of his father's presence. "There has to be something we can do," Camilla said, looking around at the gathered staff. "Professional restoration services, document experts, someone who can help save these precious items." Her voice carried the authority of her position, but also the desperation of a mother watching her child suffer. Matthews shifted nervously, knowing that his actions had created a problem that might not have any solution. Water damage to old photographs and documents was often irreversible, especially when the items had been soaked as thoroughly as these had been. He watched as Tom carefully placed each salvaged item into a makeshift container that Bennett had provided. The young man's movements slow and deliberate, as if he was handling pieces of his own soul. The morning sun continued to rise, casting longer shadows across the courtyard where this family tragedy was unfolding. What should have been a simple security inspection had turned into a moment that would be remembered by everyone present for years to come. The casual destruction of irreplaceable family memories had created a wound that might never fully heal. As Tom stood up with his collection of damaged treasures, he looked directly at Matthews for the first time since the incident began. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep sadness that somehow made the situation even more heartbreaking. "These things can't be replaced," he said simply. "They're not just objects. They're all I have left of my father, and now they're destroyed." The quiet dignity in Tom's response made Matthews feel even worse about his actions. A burst of anger might have been easier to handle than this quiet grief from a young man who had already lost so much in his life. News of the incident traveled faster than anyone could have imagined. Within an hour, whispers had reached the private quarters where Prince William was reviewing his schedule for the day. His personal secretary, James Morrison, approached him with obvious reluctance, knowing that the prince would not be pleased with what he had to report. "Your Royal Highness," Morrison began carefully, "there's been an incident in the main courtyard involving your stepmother and her son. I think you should be made aware of the situation before it escalates further." William looked up from his documents, immediately sensing the gravity in Morrison's tone. "What kind of incident?" he asked, setting aside his papers and giving his full attention to the conversation. Over the years, he had learned that small problems could quickly become major scandals if not handled properly. Morrison explained the situation as delicately as possible, describing how the security inspection had gone wrong and resulted in the destruction of Tom's precious family possessions. He emphasized the emotional significance of the lost items and the growing tension among the castle staff who had witnessed the event. William's expression grew more serious with each detail. He understood the complex dynamics of blended families better than most people, having navigated his own family's challenges in the public eye for his entire life. He also knew how quickly such incidents could spiral out of control, especially when they involved questions of respect and protocol within the royal household. "Where are they now?" William asked, already standing and reaching for his jacket. He had learned from his father and grandmother that sometimes the most important leadership decisions happened in moments of crisis, when quick action could prevent larger problems from developing. "Still in the courtyard, sir," Morrison replied. "The Queen Consort is trying to comfort her son, and the staff are attempting to salvage what they can of the damaged items. Officer Matthews is waiting to speak with security leadership about the incident." William nodded grimly. He had always tried to maintain good relationships with all members of his extended family, understanding that personal conflicts could easily become public relations disasters. More importantly, he genuinely cared about treating everyone with respect and dignity, regardless of their official status within the royal hierarchy. As William made his way through the castle corridors toward the courtyard, he passed several staff members who quickly averted their eyes and stepped aside. Word of his destination had spread, and everyone knew that his response to this situation would set the tone for how such incidents would be handled in the future. The staff were watching carefully to see if their future king would prioritize protocol over compassion. When William emerged into the courtyard, he took in the scene with one sweeping glance. Tom was sitting on a stone bench, carefully arranging his damaged possessions on a cloth that Bennett had provided. Camilla stood nearby, her usually perfect appearance disheveled from kneeling on the wet stones. Matthews remained at attention near the destroyed trunk, his face pale with anxiety about the consequences of his actions. William approached Tom first, his movements deliberate and respectful. He had always believed that in moments of crisis, the person who had been hurt deserved the first consideration, regardless of rank or protocol. As he got closer, he could see the extent of the damage to the photographs and documents, and his heart sank at the sight of the irreplaceable family treasures that had been destroyed. "Tom," William said quietly, his voice carrying genuine concern, "I've just heard about what happened. I'm so sorry for your loss." The choice of words was significant. William had said loss rather than incident or accident, acknowledging that this was about more than just damaged property. Tom looked up, surprised to see the future king standing before him with such obvious sympathy. "Thank you, William," he replied, using the informal name that had been established during family gatherings. "These were all I had left of my father. Some of the letters might be readable once they dry, but the photographs—" His voice trailed off as he gestured toward the water-stained images. William knelt down beside Tom, examining the damaged items with careful attention. His actions sent a clear message to everyone watching, that he was willing to literally lower himself to show respect and concern for someone who was hurting. "Tell me about these," he said, picking up one of the letters that was still partially legible. "My father wrote to me every week when I was away at school," Tom explained, his voice growing stronger as he talked about his memories. "After he died, my mother collected all his letters and gave them to me along with our family photos. He always encouraged me to follow my dreams and not worry about what other people thought. These letters were like having conversations with him even after he was gone." The emotion in Tom's voice was unmistakable, and William felt a deep connection to the young man's loss. He understood what it meant to lose a parent and to treasure every remaining connection to their memory. "Your father sounds like he was a remarkable man," William said sincerely. "These letters show how much he loved you and believed in you." Camilla watched this interaction with growing gratitude and respect for her stepson. She had always known that William was a good man, but seeing him show such genuine compassion for her son during this difficult moment meant more to her than any formal gesture of support could have meant. This was the kind of leadership that would serve him well when he became king. William spent several more minutes examining the damaged items with Tom, asking thoughtful questions about the memories associated with each photograph and letter. His genuine interest and compassion created a sense of calm in the courtyard that had been missing since the incident began. The staff members who were watching began to relax, sensing that their future king was handling the situation with wisdom and grace. After ensuring that Tom felt heard and supported, William stood and turned his attention to Officer Matthews. The guard had been standing at rigid attention throughout the entire interaction, his face growing more anxious with each passing moment. He knew that his actions would have consequences, but he had no idea what form those consequences might take. "Officer Matthews," William said, in a clear, authoritative voice that carried across the courtyard, "please explain to me exactly what happened here this morning. I want to understand every detail of how this situation developed." Matthews straightened even more, if that was possible, and began to recount the events in precise military language. He described the routine security inspection, Tom's difficulty with the trunk clasps, and his own decision to intervene forcefully. As he spoke, his voice became smaller and more uncertain, especially when he reached the part about grabbing the trunk and tearing it apart. "I was trying to expedite the process, sir," Matthews concluded weakly. "I didn't realize the trunk was so old or that it contained such important personal items. I should have been more patient and careful, but I was focused on maintaining our security schedule." William listened without interruption, his face remaining neutral throughout the explanation. He understood the pressures that security personnel faced and the importance of maintaining protocols, but he also recognized that Matthews had made a serious error in judgment that had caused real harm to a family member. "Officer Matthews," William said when the explanation was complete, "you've served this family faithfully for 15 years, and your dedication has never been questioned. However, what happened here today represents a serious failure in how we treat people, regardless of their status or our security requirements." The courtyard fell completely silent as everyone waited to hear how William would handle this delicate situation. His response would send a message about the values and expectations of the royal household, and it would be remembered by everyone present for years to come. "The items you destroyed cannot be replaced," William continued, his voice growing firmer. "These were not just possessions. They were irreplaceable connections to a deceased father and family history that spans generations. Your impatience and lack of care have caused genuine grief to someone who had already suffered significant loss in his life." Matthew's face went completely white as he absorbed the full weight of William's words. He had known that he had made a mistake, but hearing it described in such clear terms made him realize just how seriously he had failed in his duties. William paused for a moment, looking around the courtyard at all the people who were watching this interaction. He knew that his next words would be repeated throughout the castle and beyond, possibly even reaching the media if the story leaked. He needed to balance justice with mercy, accountability with compassion. "However," William continued, "I also recognize that this was not an act of malice but rather a moment of poor judgment under pressure. Officer Matthews, you will be suspended from active duty pending a full review of this incident. During that time, you will undergo additional training on cultural sensitivity and the proper handling of personal property during security inspections. The suspension was serious, but not career-ending, which surprised many of the observers who had expected harsher consequences. William's approach showed that he understood the difference between honest mistakes and deliberate wrongdoing, even when those mistakes had serious consequences. Furthermore, William added, "You will personally oversee the professional restoration of every item that can possibly be saved. You will research the best document and photograph restoration services available and ensure that no expense is spared in attempting to recover what was damaged. This will be your responsibility until every possible effort has been made." This additional requirement meant that Matthews would be personally invested in trying to fix the damage he had caused, rather than simply accepting punishment and moving on. It also demonstrated William's commitment to doing everything possible to help Tom recover his precious memories. Tom looked up at William with obvious surprise and gratitude. He had expected apologies and possibly some form of compensation, but he hadn't dared to hope for such a comprehensive effort to restore his damaged possessions. The fact that William was personally ensuring that every possible effort would be made meant more to him than any amount of money could have meant. Camilla watched this entire exchange with growing admiration for her stepson's wisdom and leadership. He had managed to address the serious breach of protocol while also showing genuine care for her son's loss. His response demonstrated the kind of balanced judgment that would serve him well as a future monarch. William wasn't finished with his response to the situation. He turned back to Tom, who was still carefully organizing his damaged possessions on the cloth that Officer Bennett had provided. The young man's careful handling of each water-stained photograph and torn letter showed just how precious these items were to him. Despite their damaged condition, "Tom," William said, his voice taking on a more personal tone, "I want you to know that what happened here today is not acceptable, and it doesn't represent the values we try to uphold in this household. Everyone who enters these grounds, whether they're family, staff, or visitors, deserves to be treated with respect and dignity." The words carried special weight coming from the future king, and everyone in the courtyard understood that William was making a statement about his expectations for how people should be treated within the royal household. His public support for Tom sent a clear message about the importance he placed on family relationships and basic human decency. "I'd like to make you an offer," William continued, surprising everyone present. "I have access to some of the world's finest document restoration experts through our connections with museums and historical societies. I'd like to arrange for your father's letters and photographs to be examined by the same specialists who work on priceless historical documents." Tom's eyes widened at this unexpected offer. He had resigned himself to losing most of his father's letters and many of the photographs, but the possibility of professional restoration gave him hope that some of these precious memories might be saved. "Additionally," William said, "I'd like to invite you to work with our family historians to create a proper archive of your father's letters and your family history. We have resources that could help preserve these memories not just for you, but for future generations of your family." This offer went far beyond what anyone had expected. William was essentially offering to treat Tom's family memorabilia with the same care and attention that was given to official royal documents and artifacts. It was an extraordinary gesture that demonstrated his genuine commitment to making things right. Camilla felt tears forming in her eyes as she watched her stepson extend such generosity to her son. The offer wasn't just about restoration services. It was about recognition and respect for Tom's family history and his place within the extended royal family. William was showing that he valued all family connections, not just the official ones. "Your Royal Highness," Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say. This is far more than I ever expected or hoped for. Thank you for caring about my father's memory and these items that mean so much to me." William smiled warmly at Tom's response. "Family is family," he said simply. "Your father was clearly an important man who raised a good son, and his memory deserves to be preserved properly. Besides, these letters and photographs are part of our extended family history now, and they deserve the same care we give to all our family treasures." Officer Bennett, who had been quietly helping to organize the damaged items, stepped forward with obvious relief. "Sir," he said to William, "I've managed to separate the items by condition. Some of the photographs appear to have minimal water damage, and several of the letters are still quite readable. With proper restoration, I believe much of this collection could be saved. William nodded approvingly at Bennett's initiative. Officer Bennett, I'm impressed by your immediate response to help in this situation. Your actions today show the kind of compassion and quick thinking we value in our security team. I'd like you to work directly with Officer Matthews during the restoration process to ensure that everything is handled with the utmost care. This assignment served multiple purposes, but rewarded Bennett for his helpful response while also ensuring that Matthews would have supervision and support during his remedial training. It also meant that Tom would have an advocate within the security team who had already shown genuine concern for his situation. The crowd of staff members who had gathered to watch the proceedings began to disperse, their conversations filled with admiration for William's handling of the crisis. Word would spread quickly throughout the castle about how their future king had balanced justice with mercy, accountability with compassion. The story would become part of castle folklore, told and retold as an example of true leadership. Officer Matthews approached William hesitantly, his relief at avoiding termination mixed with determination to make amends for his actions. Your Royal Highness, he said, I want you to know that I will personally ensure that every possible effort is made to restore these items. I understand the gravity of what I've done, and I'm committed to making it right. William studied Matthews for a moment before responding. Officer Matthews, mistakes happen to everyone, but it's how we respond to those mistakes that defines our character. Use this experience to become better at your job and more thoughtful in your interactions with people. That's how you can truly make amends for what happened today. The morning sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting new light across the courtyard where this drama had unfolded. What had begun as a routine security inspection had become a defining moment that would be remembered by everyone present as an example of leadership, compassion, and the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect. 2 weeks after the incident in the courtyard, remarkable progress had been made in restoring Tom's damaged family treasures. True to his word, William had arranged for the items to be examined by Dr. Sarah Chen, one of Europe's leading experts in document and photograph restoration. Her laboratory in London was equipped with the most advanced technology available for recovering damaged historical materials. Dr. Chen had been initially skeptical about the possibility of saving the water-damaged items, but when she learned of their personal significance and the circumstances under which they had been damaged, she committed herself fully to the restoration project. Using specialized drying techniques, chemical treatments, and digital enhancement technology, she had managed to save far more than anyone had dared to hope. Tom stood in Dr. Chen's laboratory, hardly believing what he was seeing. Photographs that had seemed completely ruined were now clear and vibrant, mounted in protective frames that would preserve them for generations to come. His father's letters had been carefully restored, with missing words reconstructed through analysis of ink patterns and paper fibers. Even the damaged trunk had been repaired by master craftsmen who specialized in antique leather goods. The letters were actually easier to restore than we initially thought, Dr. Chen explained as she showed Tom through the laboratory. Your father used high-quality ink and paper, which helped the text survive the water damage better than modern materials might have. We've been able to recover about 90% of the original text. Tom picked up one of the restored letters, reading his father's familiar handwriting with tears in his eyes. The words of encouragement and love were as clear as the day they had been written, and holding the letter felt like having a conversation with his father once again. I never thought I'd be able to read these again, he said softly. Dr. Chen smiled at his reaction. We've also created digital copies of everything, so you'll have permanent backup records of all these materials. Prince William suggested that we prepare a bound collection of the letters that you can read without handling the originals, which will help preserve them for future generations. The bound collection was a beautiful leather volume that contained high-quality reproductions of every letter, photograph, and document from the trunk. It was designed to look like a family Bible or important historical text, giving Tom's father's words the dignity and permanence they deserved. William had personally approved the design and materials used in creating this special archive. Officer Matthews had been present for every step of the restoration process, as William had required. Initially, Tom had been uncomfortable with this arrangement, but over time he had come to appreciate Matthews's genuine remorse and dedication to making things right. The officer had learned as much about document preservation as some professional archivists, and his careful attention to detail had helped ensure that nothing was overlooked. "I want to thank you again," Tom said to Matthews as they prepared to return to Windsor Castle with the restored items. "I know this wasn't easy for you, but seeing how much effort you've put into fixing what happened, it means a lot to me." Matthews nodded gratefully. "Tom, I've learned more in these past 2 weeks than I did in my previous 15 years of service. Not just about document restoration, but about treating people with the respect they deserve. I'm a better person and a better officer because of this experience, even though it started with my worst mistake." The two men had developed an unlikely friendship during their time working together on the restoration project. Matthews had heard many stories about Tom's father, and had come to understand the depth of the loss that his careless actions had nearly made permanent. This understanding had motivated him to work even harder to ensure that every possible item was saved. When they returned to Windsor Castle, William was waiting to see the results of the restoration efforts. He had followed the progress closely, receiving regular reports from Dr. Chen and checking in with both Tom and Matthews throughout the process. His personal involvement had sent a clear message throughout the royal household about the importance he placed on making things right. "Tom, I'm so pleased to see how well the restoration turned out," William said as he examined the recovered photographs and letters. "Your father's words are as powerful now as they were when he first wrote them. These letters show what kind of man he was and what kind of values he passed on to you." Tom carefully opened the bound collection of letters, showing William some of his father's most meaningful advice and encouragement. "He always told me to stand up for what I believed in, and to treat everyone with kindness regardless of their station in life," Tom said. "I think he would have been proud of how you handled this whole situation." William was moved by this connection between Tom's father's values and his own approach to leadership. "I think your father and I would have gotten along well," he said with a smile. "Those are the same principles I try to follow in my own life and work." The successful restoration project had become something much larger than anyone had initially imagined. It had strengthened family relationships, taught valuable lessons about leadership and compassion, and created new friendships between people who might never have connected under normal circumstances. Most importantly, it had preserved precious family memories that had seemed lost forever. 6 months after the courtyard incident, the story had become legendary within the walls of Windsor Castle. Staff members would often tell new employees about the day Prince William showed everyone what true leadership looked like, turning a potential disaster into an example of compassion and wisdom that would be remembered for generations. Tom had become a regular visitor to the castle, no longer feeling like an outsider in his mother's new world. The restored letters from his father had given him renewed confidence and strength, and William's public support had helped him feel truly accepted as part of the extended royal family. He had even started a small foundation dedicated to helping other families preserve their historical documents and photographs. The foundation, called Letters to Tomorrow, was supported quietly by William and had already helped dozens of families recover and preserve important family memorabilia. Tom worked with Dr. Chen and other restoration experts to provide services to families who could never afford such specialized help on their own. Every project reminded him of how close he had come to losing his own precious memories. Officer Matthews had not only returned to active duty, but had been promoted to head the new cultural sensitivity training program for all castle security personnel. His personal experience with the devastating effects of careless actions had made him uniquely qualified to teach others about the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity, regardless of their status or circumstances. "I tell every new officer that everyone who enters these grounds is carrying something precious," Matthews would explain during training sessions. "It might be obvious like family photographs, or it might be invisible, like memories and feelings. Our job is to protect not just the physical security of the castle, but also the dignity and respect that every person deserves." The new training program had become a model for other royal residences and government facilities throughout the country. Matthews's approach emphasized empathy and understanding alongside traditional security protocols, creating a more humane approach to necessary security measures. Officer Bennett had also been recognized for his quick thinking and compassionate response during the original incident. He had been assigned as Matthew's assistant in developing the training program, ensuring that the lessons learned from that difficult morning would benefit future generations of security personnel. Camilla often reflected on how the incident had actually strengthened her relationships within the royal family. William's immediate and compassionate response to her son's crisis had shown her that she and Tom were truly valued as family members, not just tolerated as additions to the royal household. The experience had given her confidence in her place within the family structure. "I knew William was a good man," she confided to a close friend. "But seeing him drop everything to help Tom when he was hurting, that showed me what kind of king he's going to be. He understands that leadership is about serving others, especially when they're vulnerable or in pain." Dr. Chen had been so moved by the project that she had established a new program at her laboratory specifically for restoring family documents and photographs for people who had experienced traumatic losses. She partnered with Tom's foundation to identify families who needed help, creating a network of support that extended far beyond the original incident at Windsor Castle. The restored trunk now sat in a place of honor in Tom's apartment, filled once again with his father's letters and the family photographs that meant so much to him. But now it also contained new items. Letters from William expressing his friendship and support, photographs from family gatherings where Tom was clearly welcomed and valued, and documents related to his foundation work. William had learned valuable lessons from the incident as well. He had seen how quickly a small problem could escalate into a major crisis, and how important it was to respond with both firmness and compassion when people were hurting. The experience had reinforced his belief that true leadership meant protecting and caring for everyone, regardless of their formal status or position. The bound collection of Tom's father's letters had become one of his most treasured possessions. He would often read through them when facing difficult decisions, drawing strength from his father's wisdom and encouragement. The letters that had nearly been lost forever now served as a constant source of guidance and inspiration. On the anniversary of the incident, Tom, William, Matthews, and Bennett met in the same courtyard where everything had begun. They stood together looking at the spot where the trunk had been torn open, but instead of focusing on the destruction that had occurred, they talked about the positive changes that had grown from that difficult moment. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead to the best outcomes, Tom reflected as they stood together in the morning sunlight. "I almost lost my father's letters that day, but in the end I gained so much more. New friendships, a stronger sense of family, and the opportunity to help other people preserve their own precious memories." William nodded in agreement. "Crisis reveals character," he said, "not just in how we handle our mistakes, but in how we support each other when things go wrong. What happened here showed me that our family and our household are stronger than I realized." The morning sun cast the same long shadows across the courtyard as it had on that fateful day 6 months earlier. But now those shadows seemed to represent not destruction but growth, the long reach of positive change that had grown from a moment of crisis, spreading far beyond what anyone could have imagined when the first leather strap tore and scattered precious memories across the ancient stones.